Hello ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning into the Progressive Parent YouTube channel. I have a lovely guest for us this evening. I'm speaking to Naomi Aldort, the author of Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves, which I think is a wonderful mixture between parenting skills and some sort of mindfulness practice to teach you how to be more present with what's going on for yourself, what's going on for your children, and through that become a better parent. Hello Naomi, how are you?
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm very well, thank you.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. Before we get started, for people who don't know anything about you, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into doing what you're doing, writing the book and giving these lectures that you give?
You know, we all live our life in a way, there is no doer, as Byron Katie says. We are spiritually, we're this being in a body that seems to do what it does and attract what it attracts and creates waves around itself, whatever they are, and come up with ideas. I don't know where they come from. The mind all of a sudden conjures these responses, these ideas. So I would say that the way I love to answer this question is a big I don't know. What it does. It's what this woman does. But how she did it is, it started from being a piano teacher. Actually was originally a musician, a singer and a pianist, classical music, and I started getting responses from parents of students of mine that they're getting therapy out of piano lessons. And then parents asked me to give therapy to the whole family. Particularly in the beginning, there was one family that said their daughter and themselves, they've done psychotherapy for 7 years by then with no real results. And then 2 months of piano lessons of their 11 years old started transforming her. So they wanted the whole family to do sessions with me. I told them, look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm willing to get together with you, but let's limit it to 10 sessions because I don't want to waste your time and my time. Well, so we limited the time. Actually, we came up with 7 sessions. They liked that number. We produced all the results, the breakthroughs that for 7 years they couldn't produce. And 2 years later, when I met this woman and I asked, did the results last? She said, absolutely. Can I have a session with you and produce results in 1 session? So she did. So that was always my commitment to just see through. And I have no idea where I got that gift from. Families come to me from all over the world, to my house for like a few days, or I go to their places, sometimes in other countries, in other parts of America or Europe or Australia. And then, you know, problems that they used to have for years, you know, I see what's going on and something there has this razor ray that points to what it is. And I didn't make that in me. It's a gift. It's one of those things where I'm always as amazed as everybody else, but I pin it and I clear it and the problems disappear. So that's why my husband has, on the back of my book, my husband wrote one of the blurbs. Naomi Aldort is a miracle worker. I know it because I'm married to her. That's
What a wonderful thing to have said about you by your husband.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was originally a piano teacher, then I had my own children, but already before that, I was already working with parents. I was giving workshops for music teachers, which I still do, about music and getting young children to excel in music through play and creativity. And I still sing and play the piano a bit myself, to have musical kids, 2 of the 3. And that's kind of evolved by me starting writing my ideas in articles. My first article that I ever submitted to Mothering magazine when it was in print international, 1994, was accepted. As a result of it, I was invited to public speaking. More articles were published, and so on and so forth. By the time the book came out, I was actually quite well known in the progressive parenting movement, and now the book is in 16 languages or 15 languages and bestseller in some countries, and I travel and speak and keep living my wonderful life.
And a wonderful book it is. What you've said, that's a really lovely story and also quite inspiring for me, because actually I was a piano teacher as well, and I've just recently retired from that to focus on my communication coaching. But I think that was, you know, for me a really wonderful experience as well, to connect with children, and there was always so much more going on than just the music lessons as well. For me, it was very much about modelling a new way of learning where the children were more in charge of their own destiny than they were in school. So it seems like we have some interests in common in that respect.
Yeah.
What was it like, if you wouldn't mind my asking, transitioning from having written so extensively about dealing with children to then having your own children and applying that in your own personal life?
Smooth. You know, it's one of those things where it's so smooth that I don't know again how to answer, because I don't remember a transition.
Right.
It was, you know, my first baby was in my arms, home birth, co-sleeping, and all I thought I knew what love is, but until now I haven't really. And that this is just beyond belief, the pleasure of loving, literally, of this human being, is just beyond belief, and it still is. I mean, I think parenting is an incredible path, and I don't know that I had transition. I just went right into it like I always knew, in a way. Not that there weren't surprises, though. I don't want anybody to think this was some kind of a panacea. We had 3 children, we had fights, we had jealousy, we had all the things that normal family have, and that actually helped me to help other parents. Because if I didn't have any difficulties and our children were these angels instead of children, which I'm glad they weren't, also for their own sake, then how would I know what children are like in a close encounter in the home? Because they taught me a lot. And then when children come to my home with whole families and I do workshop, I encounter people's homes, I learn all the time. I learn from the children, from the parents. So yeah, it was a smooth transition, but it's not that the road is never bumpy, and that the bumpy places are when we learn the most.
Yeah, and we hope to never stop learning. One of the quotes from your book that I always come to time and time again, it's something that really stuck with me, was this one: emotions are a form of discharge. Just like sweat or a bowel movement, they have to be acknowledged so they don't get in the way. Can you teach us some of the ways that we can best engage with our children's emotions?
Yes, absolutely. And maybe it'd be really memorable for the listener to hear my concept about emotional constipation. It's like when a child, because it's the same thing. I mean, when I tell parents, they try to prevent children, or when we were children, we were prevented from crying and told not to cry and not to feel. Can you imagine preventing a human being from going to the bathroom? We would literally die, and we couldn't do it. So luckily, we couldn't do it. But really, the emotions are there to be expressed, to emote, to move. They move us, and they need to get out there. So I have the first chapter of my book is really about self-expression. And if one reads nothing but that, it would already change their parenting ways if they don't already know this concept. This concept, through my work for now 20 years, and some other people who glued on to it on their own, through me, through Chaim Ginot, nonviolent communication. There is a lot going on. So it has opened up a lot. And in the 60s, there was reevaluation counseling by Harvey Jackins, who taught, again, to acknowledge emotions and let the tears flow freely. So the example here is really important, because today I'm almost working back from it a little bit with parents, because a lot of parents take it too far. So the example is, of course, when a child is crying, to not say don't cry, to not say nothing happened, but the opposite. Oh, I see you scraped your knee. And you hug them and kiss them, and you can cry as long as you need. At the same time, you want to reassure them. You want to ask them, are you afraid it'll keep hurting like that? Yes, I understand. And it will not keep hurting like that. We'll put something on it and it'll gradually go away. So you don't want to pump the feeling. So today, some people take the validation that I teach in the SOLVE formula, which maybe we'll talk about later.
Yes, we'll get to the SOLVE formula for sure.
Yeah, so some people with connection to emotions go overboard and dramatize the emotion, which is why in the book, every time I talk about validation, I also remind, or every third time, without drama. So you don't want to come to a child and say, I'll tell you a story, an example. It was a birthday party, lots of kids. And they had this little wagon that children sit on and take each other in. This is country setting. And so there were a lot of kids, too many kids on that little wagon that are being pulled a little downhill, and it toppled over and all the children fell off. And one mother came from the inside of the house screaming, "Oh no, oh no." So it was her daughter, of course, who started crying. So it's an example where, you don't want to manufacture the emotion in the child. You want to connect with the emotion that's there and give the child freedom to express themselves. But if you come with, "Oh no, what happened? Oh no, you hurt yourself. Oh, that must hurt so much. Oh no, what are we gonna," And the mother picked her up, and this was the only child that ended up in her mother's arms, sobbing and crying, while all the other kids, some kids had some scratches and some, got some kisses and hugs and helped and brushed the dust off, etc. But she was the only one that's crying. So the other side of it is an example of being connected emotionally, but not igniting a feeling that isn't there. My 3-year-old child, I remember looking at him. He was outside on the porch riding his tricycle, or maybe he was only 2.5 or something. And I was sitting inside, and then he tumbled over with the bicycle on him. And initially he screamed, he was surprised, but I didn't see anything serious happening. So I stayed put. He didn't even know that I'm seeing him. And he looks around to see if anybody's reacting, and nobody was reacting. So he got up, he got his tricycle up, he got on the tricycle, he went on riding. The same thing when a 1-year-old tries to walk and they fall and they look at us. What am I supposed to feel? And you smile at them and say nothing, and they get up and they keep walking.
So that's an important balance for caregivers to learn, to validate their children's emotions and allow their children's emotions, but not to dramatize them, and to encourage the children to feel emotions that they might not feel at all. At that point, it might be more about the parent having a sense of importance or efficacy by being needed by the child.
Yes, Antony, this is a very, very important point, because my work is mostly with the parents, and the children transform because the parents learn to know who they are and not project their anxiety or their anger or their issues on their children. So
and hence the beautiful title of your book, Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves. Part of being able to raise our children in the way that you teach is to first raise ourselves.
Yes, So let me give you a couple of more examples, because to me, examples are the most helpful.
Yeah, me
So,
too.
you know, so there was this mother in the park, the child, she had only one banana. She gave the banana to a child. This happens a lot. The banana broke, the broken banana, classy example. And this woman was really wonderful. She wanted to validate the feeling, to be really connected. And she said to the child, "Oh, what a bummer. Your banana broke. Are you sad and disappointed because you wanted the banana whole? And do you need a whole banana?" And, she was doing what I call a communication workshop, pumping emotions to a degree they weren't there in the first place. And the child was so convinced by her mother that at that point she screamed and demanded to go to the store to get another banana, which was not necessary and not her initial, where she initially was. So, this when people ask me, when I tell this story, so what do you recommend? I say, well, a way to be also more respecting in emotional connection, in validation, is to acknowledge the facts rather than to read the feelings into the child. It's actually non-respectful, and a lot of children don't like when you read their feelings altogether, and feel offended, and it's their private inner world, and you're telling them what they feel, or you're guessing it. So I said, you just say, "Oh, the banana is now in two parts and you want a whole banana." And if it's an older child and something different break other than banana, and it's more serious for them, I even teach them to do something similar to the work of Byron Katie, um, where you help the question, and it includes validation, but it goes beyond validation. You help the child see that the fantasy they're playing in their head of the whole banana or the whole tower or the whole rope or whatever it was that broke, is what causes their upset. So let's say a 7 years old, a stick that they really fell in love with in the park broke, and he's upset, and say, I would ask them, based on the Byron Katie 4 questions and turnaround. So are you imagining the stick whole? And when you imagine it, while and you want it to be that way in your imagination, how do you actually feel? You say, well, then I want my stick to be whole. And I say, well, what if you didn't imagine the whole stick and you just looked at this one? And you work with them through the whole process, to realize the emotion is valid, but it's induced by a thought, not by the stick. The 2 sticks are fine. There are other big sticks that can be found in the forest. Having 2 can be interesting too. I mean, it's not like it's a problem. The problem is the child is having a thought, I should have a whole stick, the stick shouldn't have broke. So, or saying to them, are you saying to yourself, depending on their age, that the stick should be whole, that the stick shouldn't have broken? And yes, that's what they say to themselves. And how would they be without saying that to themselves? And then getting to the turnaround. Children are so quick, sometimes I do the turnaround right away. So children call each other names. And I have a story that I tell a lot in workshops about this family intensive, who came to my house, and we were together in the car, and one child called the other stupid, and they start kicking each other in the back seat, and I was in the front with the mother, and I just say, I'm stupid too. And I gave them an example of some stupidity, and then they started telling me examples of their own stupidity, and we sang in rhythm all kind of song. I'm stupid, you're stupid, we are stupid too, Beethoven is stupid, the president is stupid, I mean, whatever. And we were clapping, and we were having fun, and we were giving examples, and everybody was trying to outdo the example of the other person's stupidity. And the interesting thing is that 2 weeks after they left here, the mother called me for her session, and she reported that the kids were getting along so much better, and that the older child said to her, I can't hurt my sister anymore, because no matter what I say, it never hurts her. And so instead of telling them over and over again, don't do it, and it hurts feelings, teaching them to be weak and feel more emotions that they need to, because what's the problem with stupid? I don't know a person who isn't sometimes stupid. And I also teach games to play with the children, to connect with them emotionally, and to show that all feelings are all right. So in the area of not being hurt by words, for example, we do a game, a circle game. The family sits together throwing a ball or pillow at each other, and you throw a ball at someone and you say, you're stinky. And the other person has to say, yes, I am. Thank you. Yes, I am. And give an example of when they're stinky. And this can include also wonderful things like you're generous, or it can be you go around, one word for going around through the circle so everybody gets the same word. Can do it with friends and family, can have as big a circle as you want. And you learn that whatever somebody says about you, you can always accept it. You don't have to defend yourself, and you can just be there with it. So it's not enough to connect with the emotions. It's also important to empower, to be with the emotions as emotions, not as reality. That's where self-realization come in.
And what a wonderful advantage that must be to take into our adult lives, where in the office or wherever you happen to work, someone might want to describe you using an adjective. If you're able to find a moment where that adjective might have been true for you and accept it, you put yourself in a good position to avoid a lot of conflicts and fights. It's very hard to consider being resentful and continue criticizing someone who says, well, yes, actually, I do that sometimes. I can see your point.
Yes. And that's exactly what I teach. I say, first say yes, catch the ball that's being thrown at you. Thank you, yes. And find it. Because if there is an adjective in the dictionary of a human behavior, then I have it. Right. They would have invented those adjectives other than on our backs, on our behaviors, on our emotions. So if somebody calls me greedy, I'll find 3 examples when I was greedy. Somebody calls me generous, I can find examples of my generosity. It's all there. You know, if somebody calls me stinky, I have my moments. I know everybody does. So if there is a word for it, then it's fine. And we want to teach the children to actually be at peace with all the qualities that they are, rather than defensive and constantly afraid about their image and having to defend this perfect image. I never stink, and I never stingy, and I'm never stupid. That's a huge toll for any human being at any age to have to live with and to defend. How much more freedom, emotional freedom and strength we have when all the qualities are all right with us. And then we can connect with the other person. The other person says, you know, you've done this and this, that was stupid. And I says like, yeah. And now we're connected with both of us seeing me, right? Rather than we're both at war, we are completely peaceful and we're together, connected, understanding each other, seeing our own humanity. So when we connect emotionally with a child, we never want to deny the feeling that comes from them, but we don't want to drown with them. We need to stay on shore and help them get out of the waters by sometimes helping them seeing that they're in a water, imaginary water, and sometimes doing real physical things that have to be taken care of, and hugging and listening. And then the validation is never a system that intends to stop the emotion. That's another important thing about connecting with emotions. So if you have done whatever conversation that validates and empowers, and the child needs to do crying and screaming and throwing things, then you be with them.
And that is...
the validation may bring more tears, and you just be with it until the end. You just be there. I understand. And you just stay calm. Don't get anxious.
And that's something we need to be very patient with, because sometimes accepting someone's emotions, whether they're a child or an adult, their emotions may intensify, and it's very easy to get impatient and think, I need to do something here, I need to fix this, I don't know if this is helping. It might well be a few hours before that person comes to you and says, thank you so much, I feel a lot better now. And we need to have the bravery to understand that, really accepting what other people are experiencing around us is really giving them experience, or giving them permission to experience what they're experiencing. And the old saying goes, the only way out is through. And I think that's very true for our emotions. If we want to come out the other side of our emotions, we have to go through them.
Yes, and be at peace with however intense they are, both parent and child. The child learns from the parent, oh, it's all right to feel my feelings and to have them be intense and to go through them.
And what can we learn about dealing with our own emotions from all you've taught us so far?
Well, this would take a few hours if you want to get into that, because that's the main part of the work that I do is with the parent, not the child, because the children are really just the projected material of the parents, mirror of the parents. So when the parents deal with their own healing of what happened to them as children and the concepts that they're running through their head, and they clear those up, then the child is just a mirror. Then whatever is in the mirror becomes clear as well with the parent. So when parents come to me, and I have, mostly working by phone and Skype internationally, giving sessions like the way we talk right now, or people come to me, or I go to them, or I do workshops and web seminars. Anyway, so what I mostly do with people is on the backs of Byron Katie and the inquiry. What I did originally is the solve formula, and I still do the solve formula, but the S has become more intense. The S, not more intense, excuse me, the ring of the phone distracted me. I unplugged it. The S is the self-investigation, and I've expanded it. And it's also in the book about inquiry, but in the book I have not demonstrated the full inquiry, which I do with people now and have done for years. But that's really the bottom line. When a parent says to me, my child has a lot of tantrums, I don't know anything about their child. That's a mirror. I know that the parent has a lot of tantrums.
Yes.
And it's not the parent's fault. It's what happened to them as a child. So, and how they grew up. But we go into their tantrum. Their tantrum is, my child doesn't go to sleep. I'm so tired. That's a tantrum. And then they struggle and say to the child, I have to have you go to sleep. Come on, fall asleep. They rock them. They do whatever they want to do, and they're anxious inside. The child feels the anxiety, doesn't fall asleep, even more so. Or whatever, or the husband didn't come home to give the woman a relief so she can go to yoga class. She missed her yoga class. She has a tantrum. She burnt the rice, or he burnt the rice, get upset all about it. And that's how we teach our children. And we also teach them to have tantrum by responding to them with that anxiety. Oh, just get what he wants because I can't handle them crying. And I'm not saying to restrict children unnecessarily or be unkind. You want to be kind. You want to create a yes environment that works for children, absolutely. But sometimes, you can't run into the busy street. You can't run in the water before you can swim. You can't just eat candy, etc., etc. There are things where the parent has to be what I call a leader, not a controller, a leader. And yet the parents sometimes, out of their wanting to connect with the child, become a little bit of their own puddle and can't quite do it, or are anxious and put that anxiety on the child. So the tantruming is definitely a good example where in families that the children tantrum a lot, I know that in their own adult way, the parents are tantruming. Or when a parent says to me, my child shouldn't listen to me, I mean that my child doesn't listen to me. And I would say I would work with the parent or on their expectation that the child should listen to them. And usually they realize the child does listen, that they're actually lying. They're calling it listen, and what they mean is obey.
Right. Of
And
course.
and then the child shouldn't obey. It's not true, because you want the child to be self-reliant. You want the child to listen to themselves. You don't want to train them to be molested when they're older or younger, because they've been trained. You should just do what you're told. You know, most parents who come to me definitely see that you want to preserve the child's ability to be rooted in himself and self-reliant, like co-sleeping. You know, people say, well, shouldn't the child learn to sleep by themselves so it'll be independent? And say, no, the opposite. His independent choice is to sleep with you when it is.
Right.
And when you honor that, he's learning my feeling and how I feel life should be is right. I can trust me. And that's what creates their independence. While the other way around, when we tell them, you know, you shouldn't listen to yourself, without saying those words, of course, you should sleep in the other bed, you should listen to me, you should do what I say, they're learning to obey somebody else's authority and ignore their own, which can be rather dangerous.
Right, and there is some evidence to suggest that that children of authoritarian parents are more susceptible to peer pressure.
Exactly, that's where I was going. You just completed the sentence.
Lovely. What you said reminded me of a very touching moment that I had as a piano tutor. Coming back to that, I had a student that was sometimes quite scared to take risks with music that was a bit above his level. So one time I said, well, do you know what, I think you can do it. Why don't you give it 5 minutes, and if you still don't think you can play the piece, then we can move on to something else. You know, I'll never make you play music that you don't want to play. And he, of his own volition, turned to me and said, no, yeah, you'll try and persuade me. And I felt very touched that he said that in his own words, and noticed that I would try and persuade him, but if he wasn't to be persuaded, it was his authority at the end of the day on what music that he should learn. And if I couldn't persuade him, it was his piano lesson, not mine. I was there to help him. And I think that, you know, there's a role for parents to offer guidance and wisdom to children because they've got more experience. But it's better to negotiate and persuade than to force.
Well, I take it even further and don't even persuade. I really respect children, and I think if they have the facts, they don't need persuasion. If they know, you know, if you do this, then this can happen, these are the possibilities, and it's up to you, then there's no need to do anything else. That I totally trust them on their choices within what's healthy. I don't trust them to choose to which restaurant to go to and go to. No, I don't. That's not what I mean by trust. I'm talking about decisions about the self, autonomy, you know, the power over the self authentically, not about being seduced by the media or the store to sell you candy, or by your taste buds if they got accustomed to sugar. That's addiction, and that's being persuaded by the industry.
Right.
So
right.
I don't mean that, but I mean that within choices that are really the autonomous right and the business of each human being, that are safe and just a personal choice that has to come from inside, I would even avoid persuading. So I think that child was very, very smart.
Lovely. So you have mentioned your self formula twice before, so maybe it's time we hear in more detail, what is your healing self?
SOLVE stands for when something happens wrong. Let's say you're upset, your children are hitting each other, or a child spilled something and you're tired and you ask them many times to do it this way or that way and not spill. Before you get into saying anything, the S is for self-talk, to calm yourself down. And in the heat of the moment, you know, when you have time later, the S is really to do the full 4 questions and turnaround that I do with parents for self-realization. On the spot, if you're skilled at doing the work, the 4 questions and turnaround, you can do them quite quickly in your head. If not, I say just even imagine getting angry at the child, run the movie of yourself, and that's the S. Notice the emotions in you and own them. Realize that's you, that's not your child, and give yourself a little self-therapy inside of you. But if you have the time, even writing down the thought, like he should listen to me or he shouldn't spill the juice on the floor, whatever the thought, whatever is happening, and look at that thought quickly. And if you have done this process before, you may realize right away, this is really funny. I mean, he just spilled it. How can I say he shouldn't spill it? You know, it's like saying it shouldn't rain when it's raining. That's what happened. And then you get some relief. The A is once you got relief about yourself and you have clarity about reality, there is the child and they spilled, and that's what they're supposed to do at that moment because they did. Doesn't mean we encourage to do it again and again. It's just human accident or human emotion or whatever. So we put the attention on the child so that we can see, we can be present to them. Most of the time we make the greatest mistakes in responding to little calamities because we're too stuck in ourselves. And that's reaction. And that's why the subtitle of my book is Transforming Parent-Child Relationship from Reaction and Struggle to Freedom, Power, and Joy. So by doing the S, you get away from the reaction and become able to actually see what's going on for the child. You know, maybe it was an accident, maybe they're really upset and angry, maybe they didn't want that juice and I gave them the wrong juice against their will, I didn't hear what they say, and maybe it's something I don't know, but here it is. The L is for listen, which means, again, if it's a nonverbal child, it's about being attentive and trying to read the intent behind the child behavior. The intent is always good. So it's either an accident or there was some intent that has to be validated, acknowledged, recognized. Or if it's a verbal child, to actually listen to them. They may be talking or they may be waiting for you to ask a question. Is that what you wanted to do? Or would you like another juice? Was it an accident? Or not say anything and just give another juice and clean the juice. If you got the feeling that it was an accident, then you would treat the child like you would treat a guest. If it was a guest in your house that spilled something, you would calm them down to make sure they don't feel bad, right? Like, don't worry, I have more and I'll clean it. Don't worry, don't touch it, it's fine. That's what we would say to an adult guest. So a lot of possibilities in that attention and listen. Then the V is validate. So whatever you see is going on for the child, like we talked before. This is not about pumping some new emotions or teaching a child to feel what they, you know, what you think they should feel. Oh, bummer, you know, the juice is spilled or whatever. But it's about validating what's there. Maybe the child looks scared. I have so many example stories in the book, like one father who comes in when his daughter broke a vase in the book, and he follows, he's somebody that studied with me, that's how I know these stories, parents tell them to me, and his first validating sentence is acknowledging the anxiety she may be feeling of being afraid of him. It's not even about the vase. He says, are you afraid that I would be angry at you the way I was angry the other day when this and that happened? And she says, yes. And that's the validation. She's really connected to what he's saying because he's touching on something that happened to her. So validating. And then the E is for empower, which is what's missing, I would say, in most of the communication, skill building teaching of parenting and other, nonviolent communication is not just for that. Nonviolent communication has making inquiries, but often, at least the way people take them, is they inquire to get their need met. And it's important to know that no need is absolutely real other than some very, very basic primal needs. And if we make requests of them, we're actually digging ourselves deeper into wanting them rather than being free of even needing them in the first place. So I always remind people in the empower part that how we know what a need is very simple. We have it.
Right.
If we have it,
if we didn't have it, we'd be dead.
Exactly. So, and how we know that we don't need something is we don't have it and we're still breathing. And we're still alive. And I don't mean that we need to reduce our existence to breathing, but we do need connection and love and warmth and air and food and affection.
And these are things that make our life more rich. And if we can see these things as things that will make our life more rich, rather than things that we need for life to be bearable, then we can enjoy them while they last and retreat into a more simple pleasure when they're not available to us.
Exactly. Not only that, but then in the process, when I do the work with parents and with children, they realize that they don't really need it. So, it's like I need for them to be quiet. I need quiet. There's too much noise in the house. And pretty soon they do the process with me. Is it true that you need it? As in real need, and not something that we already proved that you are fine and you're existing without. They realize, no, I don't really need it. It's not a need. And that's a huge relief. Then when we don't have the sentence, I need quiet right now, we stop shouting at the children to be quiet when they can't. And and if we want to have some quiet time, then we design it. We get a babysitter, we wait till husband or partner is at home, we call grandma and say, would you come and take the kids for a while? So I always say to parents, if you can get what you want, don't call it a need, so that that's dramatizing a want. But if there are things that you would like to have, more quiet time, a break from the kids, more sleep, then by all means arrange it like an adult. Don't have a tantrum crying about I'm not getting it when you can't get it, but do arrange it when you can. When you can't arrange it, then it's not available to you. Then you don't need it at that moment. Why? Because it's not available. Needing something that is not available is war inside of you, makes you even more exhausted, more in pain, and a worse parent. So what kind of parent are you when you want something you can't get? Not the one you want to be. So the moment you make peace with reality by doing this process, like you turn it around, I don't need them to be quiet, and you join them and you join the noise. And I remember having two families here, and we were like having a session in the living room and heard this phenomenal noise because my husband was setting up the table for dinner, and there were all this silverware on the table, and it was actually one of my children who started it. And the children got the silverware, they went around the table and started banging on the plates. It made a huge racket. And, we needed quiet. We were having a session in the living room not far from there. Of course, we could have moved to another room, but I wanted the parents to see what I'm doing in order to learn, and I joined them. And eventually the same child who started it started screaming with it, just making the noise louder and louder. So I joined it. We had such a good time trying to be as noisy as we can. And I have a soprano, so I added quite a sound to it. And eventually it was the child who started it that said, enough, because he wanted quiet. But, you know, and then we probably got quiet this way a lot faster than we would have if we tried to tell them not to do it, when they just invented a phenomenal noise game and cooperative noise game from which they learned cooperation, you know, group working together, teamwork. You know, they're creating all this sound together. They were drumming, they were doing some rhythm, they were doing some singing, some sound, some screeching. It was really wonderful, and there was no reason on earth to negate it and demand of the children to not have their freedom so that we can have our need for quiet. So we didn't need quiet at that time, and realizing that gave us freedom to really enjoy the children.
It always seems best, whenever possible, to work with the child in whatever they're doing and use that rather than set yourself in opposition to it. But what's more, if you were to go in there and start telling them how wrong they are, and that was part of your parenting style in general, we start to feel like there's something wrong with us as children, that we're bad. And that's just never a healthy message to give. And when we look around the world, so many people, adults, are still carrying around this great weight of the badness that was put on them as a child whenever they weren't doing what their parents wanted.
Yes, exactly. And again, I'm also teaching to be leaders. It's not about license. It's not that children should do whatever they want. They're born into a society, into a family, and there are certain ways we do things and certain ways we're considerate with each other. And it's important for them to join it, not to run it. It's too much for them. So again, I want to stress that, because in recent years, parents have taken the validation and being kind and respectful sometimes too far, where they end up with children who hit them and who demand and scream at them. And it's not what's meant with that. We want the child to feel secure that they are born and grown into an existing set of social codes and behavior, and that they enjoy fitting into that and feeling comfortable with that. So that I just want to always stress that we don't want to get overboard with this respect. Respect doesn't mean license, it means freedom, and freedom for all of us to be ourselves inside, not to necessarily get whatever we want. My children used to be able to spend hours being completely silent to let me give sessions by phone. And the youngest one, if he wanted to be next to me, 2 or 3 years old, would sit for a whole hour saying nothing when I gave him something to eat and enough toys and gave him enough attention right before setting it up so he can. And he would just sit quietly. Or my children would let me take a nap when they were a little older and play with each other in the playroom, keep the door closed and not be very loud. They're totally capable of doing these things when life generally, they see that we all work to make it work for each other. It's not about a license to do whatever you want or to have whatever candy you want. It's about internal, authentic freedom to be who you are. That includes also being a person in a group and considerate of other people.
Another quote I really loved from your book is, "A child's actions are not bad or good. They are simply expressions of emotional and physical needs, or they are innocent play."
Yes. And, you know, another way that I've been saying it now is everything a child does has absolutely 100% a valid reason. And as parents, we need to go to the reason. Many people are talking to me, you know, my child is screaming or my child hitting the brother or the sister. And I say, yeah, you want to stop that immediate hitting, but don't be angry at the child for hitting, rather be understanding and connecting with the reason that they're hitting. They have a valid reason for hitting and a valid reason for not having other tools other than hitting to do what they're doing. And often the reason is curable by what parents do or by the setup. Could be as simple as don't leave your older child with the little one because they're not yet an adult and they're not a parent and they can't handle a 2 years old or a 3 years old. It's too much for them. So less time for them together, because I always say a young child should be only with someone who can actually take care of them, not with another person who is just like them, not yet having those social skills. So it could be as simple as that. It could be as simple as you not saying just a minute, but actually coming in time before things fall out of hand. It can be seeing that the older child is being really losing a sense of security in your love because you're giving a lot more care and attention to the baby, and needs some of the therapy games that I provide at the end of the book in the last chapter about how to be jealousy therapy games. I've invented lots and lots of healing games. Not all of them are in the book, but some of them are in the book. There is power games to regain a sense of power when a child feels really helpless. And there are other games that I teach in my 3 days workshop and 3 days advanced workshop, and in my private sessions and family intensives that really help children with these issues.
One thing I definitely wanted to get to is the fact that in the book you do identify 5 primary needs of children, and I was wondering if we could just spend the last part of the interview exploring what those 5 primary needs are and how we can make sure that those needs are met.
Beautiful, and that connects with what we talked before about needs. So needs are always these types of things: need for love, need for freedom. Need is never for candy or for getting to be first in line or hitting somebody. That's not a need. So
those might be strategies for trying to meet a need, and strategies could be good strategies or poor strategies, but
yeah.
Yes, but our needs are more fundamental than that.
And our job as a parent is to recognize the need, and that's how it connects to what we spoke about before. One child hits the other. Yes, we have to stop the hitting, but we need to provide for the need of the hitter, so that they wouldn't need to do that again. So our job is to prevent them from having to do it, from needing to do it. So, but the 5 basic needs that are needs that when they're not met, we're going to get problematic behaviors and issues are, first of all, love. A second, freedom of self-expression, and I'll get into them, but I want to spell them first. Then autonomy and power, which we spoke a little bit about, emotional safety, and a sense of self-esteem, of I'm worthy. So love, going back to the first one, love can only be love when it's unconditional. If you do what I say, I love you, that's not love, that's manipulation. So that's why I also teach not to praise children, not to reward, but rather to appreciate them unconditionally, even when they're doing something that we don't like. The appreciation doesn't go away. So, for example, and I like to give story examples again. When one of the children comes out of the, I think it was actually the bedroom, they were all jumping with some friends on the bed. And at 4 years old, one of my children came out. It was again when I was doing a family intensive. I was working with the mother in the kitchen. And my son comes out and says, I disturbed. And they told me that if I disturbed 5 times, I would have to leave. And it's so tempting. Parents immediately want to say, so did you learn your lesson? Which is immediately creating shaming and so much pain and so much separation, and the opposite of love. The unconditional love is out the window. It's like, oh my God, not only I was sent out of the room, but now my mother is shaming me too. She's sending me away too. And a child is likely to start hitting the mother, crying, going away despondent, depending on their nature and age. Another parent may think it's a nice thing to take the child back to the room and tell the older child who told them to leave, that maybe they should give him another chance and be inclusive and, validate the child's feeling needing inclusion and all this wonderful stuff. And now she's in the room, and the child who was sent out is feeling like a victim that has to be rescued, and the older child feels undermined. He was, being a leader and being very compassionate, giving 5 chances. I think that's plenty. And sending him away, and we're undermining him, and everybody is just learning victimhood, and will probably be more violent and aggressive next time. So anyway, when this child came to me, I didn't do any of these things, but unconditional love. I validated, so again, it's what we learned before. So I asked him, and you couldn't help yourself? And he said, yes. And I said, I know, it's hard. And when you grow older, you will be able to control yourself better, because I was concerned in putting attention on him that he may feel failing, like, how come I can't control myself? Will I ever? And he's seeing a mother who completely has no issue with it, unconditional love, or self-control if you want. I didn't have to control myself because there was no anger in me, but he could see it that way. And I'm telling him, as you grow older, you'll have more control. And I collect him into my arms, and I tell him that I love him, and I give him a kiss, and he had few tears. And then he just realizes, oh my God, no matter what I do, my mother doesn't stop loving me, and I'm all right. And I can handle that. I don't always control myself, and I'll get better. And I can handle when life doesn't go the way I want. I think I also validated you wanted to stay in the room earlier, but in the episode. And, and he's just, I kissed him, and then he kind of became soft and got off my body and went to the other room and played peacefully. And I heard him humming to himself while playing, and there was just no problem. And everybody learned the most important lesson is they're respected, they're loved, and they can handle life. So the validation didn't dramatize, nothing terrible happened to him, nobody struggled to fix, but his image in the eyes of his mother never changed. She loves him just the same. Say, yeah, I failed to not disturb, but look, I'm still fine. I'm still a human being. And the older boy in the room there knew, my leadership is accepted. I mean, he probably never doubted it. He never expected me to bring his brother back, because he knows I respect him and his choices. And he is, till this very day, as a grown-up, very much a leader in terms of social and psychological situations. Very, very compassionate and wonderful person. So that would be an example of unconditional love. Even when one child hits the other, even though you interrupt it, you keep loving. The child that hits is actually suffering more than the child who's being hit, because that one is over. The moment the hand that hit is not on him, he's fine. You give him a kiss, you say, here, why don't you do this? And you have to spend more time with the aggressor, because he's the one suffering. To be driven to hit someone, you have to suffer. The valid reason is really strong. So that's the one who needs a lot of love. And the last chapter of my book on this particular subject explains how to do it. Then comes freedom of self-expression, the first chapter of the book. And that's really the willingness to let the child have their tantrum, to let the child, and again, the book is full of examples. One of them is about a child who remembers a time that her mother threw her bike away or aside, and it broke in her anger. And the child actually recreated that scene and threw the bike and threw herself on the grass and started sobbing. The sobbing she didn't do back then when it was at relatives and there was no freedom to do it. So this mother, with my help, reminding her, just keep it free, keep validating and acknowledging, yeah, I see what you're showing me, and you were really angry at me that I did that. And the child did the full sobbing to really let them express, let them do the screaming. Screaming and tantruming doesn't hurt anybody. And we want to have the muscle the loving muscle, and it's also unconditional love, to be the loving psychologist who is able to listen. Because when we want to stop the tantrum, we're being selfish. We don't want to have the pain of listening to the child crying. We want happy children. It makes us feel nice. But truly, the child at that moment needs therapy. And the therapy is simply being listened to and doing their tantrum, doing their self-expression. And the other thing about self-expression is for the child to be free to say, I hate you, or so-and-so is stupid, or whatever it is. You know, when a child says to a parent, I hate you, I always tell parents, tell them, tell me more about it. I understand. I didn't let you have what you wanted. Tell me more how you feel about it. Yucky mommy, you know, and really acknowledging that and let that come out of their system, because again, we don't want the emotional constipation. We want reality. And yes, if the child hate is also rooted in thoughts that aren't true, like, you know, you don't love me, you love only my brother, then yeah, we go into some inquiry. We go into some examples. We want to listen. Like, okay, so what happens when you tell yourself the story that I don't love you? It's when I hold the baby, or when I tell you, when I criticize you. I see. And finding together the examples when they feel that I do love them, or that you do love them. It's like when you do this, when you do that, and reminding them, while I'm holding the baby, I love you. While I'm holding dinner pot of soup, I love you. You know, who and what I hold in my hand doesn't change my love for you. But you have to really be that. So when the child comes to you and they, so to speak, misbehaved, you are like in the story about the child coming out of that room. The love doesn't change. So that's connected to the emotional safety. The fourth one, when a child feels emotionally safe, that you would not punish them, criticize them, or reject them, or try to stop them when they express themselves, then they will express themselves fully and be done with it, and not identify with the emotion, but just see, oh, I have an emotion, and my mother is at peace, and she's holding me or listening to me if I don't want to be touched or held. And of course, if the parent is the cause of the upset, then we need to look at back to love. I mean, are you restricting them unnecessarily? Are you controlling them or manipulating them in some way? So it always goes in circle and ties back together. But emotional safety is a really tough one, because we want to give children some sense of the social values we grow up with, but we don't want to criticize what they're doing and their errors when they make them, but to actually include them and make it in a way that they can learn rather than they be afraid of us. Although some level of anxiety of children from adults is not completely avoidable so far, in order to, you know, learn certain things. But that's our goal, to make it emotionally safe as much as possible so children can express themselves. Then the need for autonomy and power, it's again, it's what we spoke about in a way already before, about respecting the child choices that have to do with his or her own inner world. This is what to do within what we provide. So if I don't want my child to eat candy, I don't have candy at home. But if all my food at home is healthy food, I don't force my child to eat a certain thing. Even if we prepare complex dinner, if they'd rather have some avocado and tomato, I would go ahead and grab the avocado and tomato and cut it into their plate and be happy that they eat something else healthy. And these are the kind of examples of the kind of food that I would offer. And so my children would choose within what's available something else, and I wouldn't force them. So respect their autonomy, where they want to sleep, when they want to go to sleep. You know, a lot of parents don't respect the child's autonomous sense of themselves when they should go to sleep. They want to put the child to sleep based on their idea of how many hours they need to sleep, when they need to get up, or even if they're homeschooled or still young and at home, just their idea that they want time to themselves without the child, and they like to use sleep as babysitter. So that's not respecting the autonomy of the child or where the child should sleep. So I have a whole lot of articles, hundreds of articles that have been published internationally, and I think there are quite a few, one of them in the Attachment Parenting International website, and others in other magazines. I don't remember where, but I think they're easy to find, about the Zen of bedtime, and there are other titles. I think the Attachment Parenting one has 2 articles about sleep. They have different titles. So that's autonomy, really respecting those inner prime. And the self-esteem is really the result of all of this. You want your child to feel who I am is right. So you don't want to devote your day to constantly giving them the message that who they are is not all right with you. So I think we gave enough examples that this would be redundant now. But what I do want to add to it is what it is not. So self-esteem is not praise. It's not pumping the ego. It's not, and again, that's a mistake that has been done in the last 10, 20 years, is people coming from a background of punishment and authoritarian parenting. They want to be really nice, and they really go overboard telling their child, you are so special and unique and you're better than everybody, basically. And the children get really hung up on that. It's hard to keep living up to that. You come into society as an adult and you're not unique, you're not special. There are billions of others like you. You're just another person. And it's really hard to put that together after you've been kind of brainwashed for years and years and years about how special and amazing you are. So I'm not saying to not treat your child with that loving amazement that you have in you, but I would spare those words and just be loving, you know.
There's always a risk of giving a compliment with an adjective. If you say someone is kind, then they might feel like they always have to be kind, and when they feel like taking care of themselves instead of someone else, they suddenly feel an obligation to live up to the label that you slapped on them. If you say they're beautiful, they might worry that one day, you know, some lovely looking ladies grew up and they were constantly told how beautiful they were, and then when they got old, they suddenly got a real complex about the fact that they were losing their looks. So I think if we want to acknowledge...
What I teach, there's a 3-part article that was published in a Canadian magazine years ago. It may be on my site, I'm not sure where it is, but and maybe an MP3. I have a whole big lecture about what to do to appreciate and connect without manipulative type of praise and evaluation. It definitely doesn't have to be evaluation, and appreciation doesn't have to have evaluation in it. If my child brings me a flower, I don't have to say good boy or how wonderful or how kind you are. I can simply say thank you. Somebody does a servings for me, I can say thank you. Or if my children are quiet in order to let me have a nap in the afternoon, I get up, I can say thank you, and I can say I'm feeling so much fresher now, it helped me so much, so that I let them know as a feedback that what they did actually had some result that in real life that was wonderfully helpful for me, rather than saying you were so good or praising them with evaluation. But when children do things for their own enjoyment, I never recommend to evaluate it, because they're doing it for themselves. They're drawing for themselves, they're singing for themselves, they're playing piano for themselves, and a teacher-student situation is a little different, because we do need to give feedback in order to create progress, but the child then expects it.
Yes.
But in the home, the child plays the piano for their own enjoyment, and if I also enjoy it, then I can sit there and enjoy and say thank you at the end.
Yes, and it was
Thank
certainly a frustration to me when my mother used to comment on my piano playing when I was trying to learn a piece.
Yes.
Um, Parents sometimes like to compliment children on things like sharing. If it came naturally to the child, they think it's something that needs to be reinforced. But if you say, "Oh, good sharing. I liked how you were sharing," you're
Yeah.
now focusing that child on the consequences to themselves. They now will share to get a verbal reward rather than
Yes.
simply share for the joy of sharing.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I've been teaching for 20 years, and it's now catching on. I've seen it in other people's articles. It's starting to be known. So yeah, absolutely. And sharing is a good example. I don't teach children to share. I think it's extremely unfair to expect children to share in a society that doesn't share.
Yes.
We we are I grew up in a society that still shared. I still could go to a neighbor and ask for things, use their phone, go into their house, it was unlocked, and take things. In today's world, your home is your castle. You lock it, you sign 20,000 pieces of paper to acknowledge that you own it or you rent it. Your car does a noise if somebody else tries to get into it, and you never loan it to anybody. Your money is yours. It's locked in the bank under your name, with your number, with your password. Oh my God, we are possessive. And children are seeing that very quickly. They see I am what I have, and they start wanting to own things and to say, this is mine, because they want to be like us. And then we come and say to them, you should share. It's like, why should I? You don't. Yeah, in the family we share, and we should keep doing that. And in our family, we try to not have mine, yours, but it's everybody's. The piano definitely was everybody's, and never, didn't create fights. And being in nature is a lot easier than having a lot of possessions. But my goodness, when children do share, it's their own pleasure to share. That's why they did it. So absolutely, these examples you give are exactly the intent to manipulate, trying to reinforce. Reinforce is the language of the behavioral psychology, of wanting to manipulate, wanting to cause the child to behave a certain way, which is the opposite of self-esteem. It's others' esteem. It's how do I become someone who pleases other people. And seeking approval is probably the main pandemic, emotional pandemic we suffer from. Every insecurity at bottom line is seeking the approval of others. And it goes so far that parents tell me, and I see it, that they sometimes in public mistreat their own child to impress an onlooker that they don't even know.
So true. And people are more likely to be strict in public because they're worried about getting dirty looks from other parents for not controlling their child.
Exactly, exactly. And I have, again, in the book, there are a couple of examples of that. One of them, the story with the diaper and the aunt, and the woman was a client of mine, so she caught herself mid-air and actually undid the path that she was, trying to impress her sister instead of take care of her child. And I always say to parents, like, the opposite. If you want the child to be self-esteemed, don't manipulate them. Don't change your behavior in front of others. Notice your own desire to seek approval and see how it gets in the way. For example, my firstborn, since age 2, every time we went to a restaurant, he didn't want to eat. He was always a very social person and very caring about other people. And he would go from table to table and talk to people. And for some of them, it was disturbing them probably. If they had a romantic candle dinner, I can imagine at 2 years old coming and telling them about dinosaurs wasn't exactly in their plans. And people would expect that I would get up and remove him from there. But that's his life, and that's their life. And in one rare case that I saw that something was extreme, I did tell the other people, not my child, to feel free to tell him off in a nice because most people I noticed did that. They would say to him after a while, okay, you know, we are having our dinner. Why don't you go somewhere else now? They took care of themselves. And it's very patronizing for me to take care of other adults by removing a child as if they cannot take care of themselves. A lot of them were enchanted and were like, finally, there was a content to their dinner because they were going together. You know how sometimes people go together for dinner with a family and they have nothing to say. And wow, this 2 or 3 years old is giving them a lecture about dinosaurs.
Wow.
And so cute, you know, he had these big blue eyes and with this blonde curly hair. And I remember his little hand would come up when he talks about Brachiosaurus. And you know, some people thought, gee, my goodness, free entertainment. So you know, I didn't need to do anything, and I didn't need to manipulate him to impress anybody because I wasn't seeking anybody's approval. So I'm sure some of the people in this restaurant, or some people when I was breastfeeding a 4 years old in public, had judgmental thoughts. But my commitment is to my child, not to impress anybody. So we are, in order to help our child have high self-esteem, we have to heal ourselves. Yes, and work on, and I do that a lot, parents work on their own need for approval and free themselves from that need for approval from their parents, from their relatives, lots and lots of stories. And that freedom allows you to be the parent you want to be and allow your child to stay rooted in themselves, which is what self-esteem is.
And what a wonderful note that is to wrap up our interview. Naomi, I'm sure we could speak for another hour, and you've been so kind coming here to share your wisdom with us. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I have.
I did, Anthony. Thank you very much.
Lovely to have you in the show, and perhaps we'll speak to you again maybe in 6 months or a year's time.
Absolutely, I would be happy to.
Lovely.